Hello, Year 12. Hope you're doing very well. Hope you're safe and keeping on top of all your A level work. If you are struggling to do so for whatever reason, please let me know. I'd rather get on top of it now before you fall behind on a lot of work. Just as a little reminder, the pink tasks, the flexible tasks, we won't require any submission. It's the green tasks that you will have to do an online submission for on Show My Homework. Hopefully you're finding all the resources on the OneDrive. Any questions, please let me know. I thought I'd try something different because I appreciate learning from a textbook is quite difficult. So I thought I'd try a YouTube video and see if this helps. So what I want you to do for this lesson is grab your textbook, grab your notebook, grab your pens. You can pause me at any time. There'll be a few tasks for you to do during this lesson. And yeah, we'll just see how it goes. So this lesson is the A01 for retrieval failure as an explanation of forgetting. So we're quickly going to recap interference, so the proactive and retroactive that we did last week. Then we're going to outline retrieval failure, and it falls under three separate categories. So we've got encoding specificity principle, context-dependent forgetting, and state-dependent forgetting. So before we move on to the starter, just as a quick reminder for proactive and retroactive. Proactive is past, so remember the P, past information interfering with new information. And retroactive is recent, so new information interfering with the old. So bearing this in mind, what do you think these scenarios are? Do you think it's proactive or retroactive? First one, Marie changes her email address after getting a lot of spam. 6 months later, her friend asks her what her old email address was, but she has forgotten. So feel free to pause me. Do you think this is proactive or retroactive? So this, of course, is retroactive because her recent information for her new email address is interfering with the old information that she learned for her old email address. Okay, next one is Jim has played double tennis for years, but when his friend stops playing, he decides to start playing singles matches. At first, he keeps the ball within the singles part of the court, but after a few matches, he keeps hitting the ball into the tram lines, forgetting that this is not permitted in a singles match. Is this proactive, past information interfering with new, or retroactive, recent information interfering with old? It is proactive. Past information of him playing doubles is interfering with the new information of him playing singles. After being dumped by his girlfriend, Julie, Jonathan starts going out with a girl called Judy. When describing her to a friend, he refers to her as Julie. Proactive or retroactive? It is proactive. Past information for his girlfriend Julie, interfering with new Judy. Okay. Last one. Elsie gets a new bank card and memorises the PIN. When she wants to use her old card, she finds she has forgotten the PIN for that one. So proactive or retroactive? It's retroactive. Her recent memory for her new bank card is interfering with her old PIN number. Okay, so that's retroactive. So I hope you feel comfortable with proactive and retroactive now. Okay, so retrieval failure. If we think back to the multi-store memory model, is the very first model that we did, the one where the environmental stimuli goes into our sensory register. If we pay attention to this sensory stimuli, it goes into our short-term memory, and through the process of maintenance rehearsal, we can transfer this information into our long-term memory. And then we briefly discussed 3 ways that information is lost from our long-term memory. So we discussed decay, we discussed interference, proactive and retroactive, and retrieval failure is the last explanation of forgetting that we're going to look at. In the evaluation for interference, you should have written appeal about accessibility versus availability. So a researcher called Sarasso found that interference happens not because the memories aren't available. So the memories are available, but they are just temporarily non-accessible. So we can't access these memories in our long-term memory. And this is because we don't have sufficient cues. What do you think could act as a cue? Feel free to pause me while you have a think about that. There are 4 cues that I want to discuss, and to show this, I want to ask the question, what is Freud's first name? Freud, the theorist that the main theorist of the psychodynamic perspective, what is his first name? So the first cue that you could have would be environmental context. Research into environmental context suggests that things in our environment at the time that we learn something, are encoded. And that in itself could act as a cue for us to remember. So if we were to go back to V8, where you learnt about Freud, research would suggest that you would be able to remember his first name just by being in the same environment that you learnt the information in. The second one is an environmental cue, so something else in your environment. For example, if I showed you a picture of Freud, it might act as a cue for you to be able to remember his first name. And then we also have internal cues. So I could give you the mental cue of his first name begins with S. And as soon as I say that, you might have immediately remembered it's Sigmund. Or you may have not. And then the last one, maybe not relevant to this example, but our emotional states also act as a cue. So this suggests that basically, for example, if we feel really, really, really sad one day, that would act as a cue for us to remember the previous time that we felt really, really sad. Or if we feel really, really happy one day, we might then remember a time from last year where we felt this exact same emotion. So that's emotional state that acts as a cue as well. So basically, a cue is something that just jogs your memory for that specific thing. Okay, so the first part of retrieval failure is encoding specificity principle, and this was studied by Tulving and Thompson. And they basically said that memory is most effective if the information that is present at learning is also present at the time of retrieval. And this basically means that the more cues that a person is exposed to, whether it be external or internal, environmental or mental, the more likely they are to remember. So as a weird example off the top of my head, if I ask you what your uncle's dog's name is, you might not be able to remember that straight away. But then if I maybe tell you an experience that they've had, something funny that the dog has done, that could act as an environmental cue for you to be able to remember that. If I told you that his name begins with B, or if I told you that he was named after a famous singer, for example, that could also act as a cue. Or if I tell you that he's brown. So basically, the more cues that you have, the more likely you are to remember something. So according to the encoding specificity principle, where should you sit your final exams? Obviously, if this was a normal world and we were still in a classroom, it would be in a classroom. If you learnt the information in your bedroom, the encoding specificity principle would suggest that you should perform better if you take the exam in your bedroom. Okay, so I've got a little task for you now. If you turn to page 54, I believe it is, in your textbook, and what I want you to do is read through the section on encoding specificity principle. It's not very long, it's just one paragraph. And I want you to fill in the blanks about Tulving and Pearson's research based on that. So if you pause me, and then we will go through the answers once you've finished. Okay, so Tulving and Pearson demonstrated the value of retrieval cues. They wanted to investigate whether retrieval cues do actually aid memory recall. So they had participants learn 48 words from 12 different categories. The words were presented as category plus word. So for example, fruit, apple, animal, panda, but then the participants were only required to remember the word. They didn't have to remember the category, okay? There were two conditions, two IVs, two things that the researcher manipulated. So the first condition was free recall. And in this condition, the participants just stated every word that they remembered. And then the cued recall, they were given the category. So they might have said, name all the animals you can remember. And they showed that 40%, there was 40% recall for free recall, and recall for cued recall was much better, it was 60%. And this demonstrates that cues have been explicitly, so consciously or implicitly, subconsciously, encoded at the time of learning and have a meaningful link to the learning material. So because participants in the cued recall had encoded the information in terms of the category that they belonged to, it meant that they could recall the information more. The second part of retrieval failure is context-dependent forgetting, and there's two pieces of research on this. The first one is one that I've already talked a little bit about. Abernethy found that students who sat a test in the same room by the same instructor as in their normal lessons got higher marks. They even performed better than those who were tested in the same room with a different instructor. So just the simple fact of having the same room and the same instructor meant that they performed better. And the second one is a very famous study by Godden and Badley, and he basically had divers learn material either on dry land or while underwater, and they found that the divers who had learnt the words on dry land performed better on dry land, and those who had learnt the words underwater recalled more underwater. What do these pieces of research both show? Just pause me while you have a little think about it. They show that the environment acts as a cue to memory in both studies. The environmental context has been encoded with the information that they have learnt, which meant that they recalled it better. Okay, and then the last one is state-dependent forgetting. So it's not just the environment that acts as a cue for memories that we may have forgotten, but also our states. So our emotional states can help us remember things that we'd forgotten. So Goodwin found that those who had learned material when drunk could recall those things better when drunk again. And the little graph on the right shows their results. So if the participants were sober when they learnt the words, they recall better when sober. But interestingly, if they were drunk when they learnt the words, they recalled the words better when they were drunk. Miles and Hardman similarly found that things learnt when exercising were better remembered when exercising than when at rest. And the last one was by Darley, and he found that participants who hid money when they were high were less able to recall where the money was when they were not high. So when they got high again, they remembered where they'd hid the money. So what do you think these three pieces of research show? It shows that our internal mental and emotional states can act as cues for our memory. Okay, so I've got a little task for you now. I want you to pause me and match the pieces of research to what they were investigating, and then we'll go through the answers. So Abernethy, who did the study on the students, was obviously investigating context-dependent forgetting, and they found that students who were tested in a different room performed worse than those who were tested in the same room where they'd learned the information, and with the same instructor as well. That all also helped recall. Goodwin et al. Investigated state-dependent forgetting, and he found an interesting result of participants who were drunk during learning of the material performed better when they were drunk again. And then Torving investigated the encoding specificity principle. So the participants who had encoded the category and then were given that category as a form of recall performed 20% better than those who weren't given the categories. Okay, so your last task for this lesson is this exam question. What is the difference between context-dependent forgetting and state-dependent forgetting? It's 4 marks, so you should take about 5 minutes to do this. So if you pause me, and then we'll have a look at the mark scheme. So for 4 marks, you should have said words to this effect. So context-dependent forgetting indicates that retrieval is more likely when the context at encoding matches the context at retrieval. That's 1 mark. And then for your 2nd mark on context-dependent forgetting, I'd like a little piece of research. Very briefly, talk about Tulving and Pilson, how they found that those who recall fewer words lacked appropriate retrieval cues. And then we've got state-dependent forgetting, which states that memory will be best when a person's physical or psychological state is similar at encoding and retrieval. So I've spoken about Goodwin, but you could have talked about the exercise research, or you could have talked about the Dali's research, But Goodwin found that those who encoded information when they were drunk were more likely to recall it in that same state. And that's what you would need for 4 marks. So if you don't think you've quite got 4 marks for that question, make sure you add any extra detail that you might need. I hope this lesson has been useful. Please let me know either way if you think this is what I should do in future, or whether you can think of a better learning method that you think would work more. Please let me know either way. And let me know if you have any questions about this lesson as well. Okay, have a great day. Bye.